Welcome to Northern BC Narratives on location. Today we have another amazing person in our city that is doing amazing stuff. His name is James. James, it's a pleasure to have you here. Oh wow, what a firm handshake! You don't get firm handshakes anymore. Oh wow, that's perfect. Nice. And what they say. The Japanese, they say that you know the person by the way they shake your hand.
Oh.
Right, in the culture. When they give you a firm handshake, they know that the deal is going to be good. When they give you a loose handshake, they maybe
Yeah, I guess that makes sense, right? Yeah, you're not being wishy-washy about it.
It's a good handshake, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Now you can overdo it. You can squeeze it so much, that they don't want to do the work with you anymore.
That is true. Yeah, I've met a couple of people like that.
There are some people like that.
Yeah.
When Jeff and I first started this thing, there's give me your hand. I want to show you something. There was some person, I'm gonna not name it. They shake our hand like this.
Oh.
You know what that means, right?
I don't.
Psychologically, this means I have the upper hand. You have the bottom hand, I have the upper hand, right?
Right.
And as soon as I see somebody shaking my hand, there's no way I work with that person, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That makes
It's a
sense.
psychological thing. They do it. They do it in business sometimes, right? To say dominance, right?
Right. They probably take classes in business
They
on
do.
how to do
Well,
that.
there's a lot of classes actually about that, right? That you can take and do this. But this thing, I don't like the upper hand, lower hand, right?
Yeah.
Because you come as equal, right? That's why you meet in the middle.
Of course.
As soon as somebody does that, it's like this person is not gonna meet us in the middle. End of contract.
Right.
Forget about them, right? But they're thinking they're doing such a great thing, right? But no, all right? You just lost everything, right?
Yeah.
Okay, James, it's a pleasure to have you here.
thank
I
you for
heard a
having
lot about you. Talk about yourself. I'm so excited. It's like this is going to be another great interview.
Well, I hope. My name is James Douglas, and I'm a career working actor, producer, writer, and director. For many, many years, I worked as part of the administration team as a media consultant for Barkerville Historic Town and Park, which is a large gold rush heritage site here in northern BC. And through my work there and meeting a variety of different media people, I'd had a background in acting, mostly theater acting, although I did some film and television as well. But I became really obsessed with starting to write and produce some short films, some short documentaries. Ultimately did a long form documentary that then worked my way into directing a couple of feature films, and I'm also an editor, so I've been doing a little bit of work in editing as well. And then when an opportunity came up here in Prince George in 2022 to open a film and television acting school here, Story Institute, I jumped at the chance to come up here and do that. So my time gig now is that I teach film and television acting to a number of really talented students here in Prince George, and I'm also doing a little bit of producing, and hopefully soon we'll be doing another directing project coming out next year.
That's amazing. So, James, how did everything started for you? So let's go to your childhood when you were a kid.
Sure.
What were you thinking? Was that your dream to do what you were doing? Just talk about it a little bit.
I'm not sure that originally it was my dream. My parents split up when I was quite young, although I have a very good relationship with my father. My mother has passed away. Growing up, I really idolized my father. He was a writer, but he was always somebody who had done a lot of amateur community theater. So he was really interested in acting and theater. And so we would talk about a lot of things. My first introduction to some of the classic films that I love came from watching them with my father. And I think that influence made me want to sort of dive into performance a little bit. It's partly to impress him, but also to sort of live the life that he kind of always did. And so I started doing amateur musicals and high school plays when I was young, got really interested in that, but still was kind of going back and forth between that and when I graduated high school, I wasn't sure if I wanted to go into theater or if I wanted to go into English and literature. So I did. I took a year of English in college, and it just wasn't really what I was interested in. I wanted to do something that was a little more active. So I auditioned for the theater department at the University of Victoria and was accepted.
Oh, wow.
Did a couple of years there, which was a really great, it was a great education because it wasn't just acting. We learned stagecraft and lighting and front of house and box office. We learned everything, all the parts that kind of go into making a professional theater run. But I started to get more interested in acting in general. So I auditioned for and was accepted to to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York.
Yep.
So I went there and then toured for a number of years. Back in Victoria, found a job up in Barkerville one year as an actor. Came up there, fell in love with the place, found excuses to be there every summer that I could be, then eventually just moved there full time, and then ultimately up here to Prince George. And so it was sort of a genesis for me. Like I always loved film and television. That was primarily the thing that I consumed. I acted on stage, but I really did love movies. And I never really thought of myself as somebody who would ultimately make movies, but just the opportunities that I had throughout the course of 3 decades now in the theater gave me an opportunity to get myself behind the camera, and I've just been really enjoying it ever since.
That is amazing. There's so much to talk about. You just give me an overview of like everything you can talk about. Let's talk about your dad a little bit,
Okay.
because I think a lot of your influences probably came from your father, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So talk about like what did he do, some of the things he's done, and then you watching him as a child. Like, how was the experience?
Well, it's interesting because I never lived with my father, so I only really ever saw him a couple of times a year. He lived in Ontario. We lived out here in British Columbia.
Oh, wow.
But we talked on the phone all the time, and we enjoyed talking about movies. I know that his experience early on, like he was a child of World War II, so his father was over serving overseas. He was alone with his mother for a lot of the time before his siblings were born. And one of his favorite things was, at least once a week they would go down to the local cinema and pay their 25 cents, 10 cents to get in, and then 15 cents would get you a drink and popcorn at the time.
Not anymore.
And they would, I know, right? But then they would just watch movies and it would give them an opportunity to escape. And so my dad fell in love with film really on, and he's got a very steel trap mind. Like his memory is unlike anybody's I've ever met.
He's unlike us.
So he remembers everything. So I mean, I can remember playing games when I was a teenager with him of like Silver Screen Wheel Pursuit, and he would win the entire game in just a couple of hands because he just knew absolutely everything about every movie that came out anywhere between about 1945 and 1990. And I was always really impressed with that, and that love that he had for actors and for the kind of the things that filmmakers really did influence me. Now, and he's a writer, he's a professional writer, so that was also a really big influence on me.
How did he start because he coming from, I guess his father wasn't there, right? So I guess he didn't have influence area.
Not at first. I mean, ultimately, when the war was over, his father did come back, but then there was some problems there too, right? Because my grandfather had gone overseas, a teetotaler, and come back with a bit of a drinking problem, and so they had to deal with a lot of that. And that's where a lot of that escapism happened as well. Like everything eventually worked out very well. But I think the gift of the gab is something that my family has always had. And so my father really focused on, he likes to say that he rents out his head for a living. And someone once told him that half a living was better than none. But he really went into, he was very interested in journalism. So he became a newspaper correspondent, and he worked for local radio stations, then ultimately moved up and did a lot of stuff for Canadian Press, and ultimately turned his journalism career into a career working for the Canadian government. He was a political attaché and speechwriter for a number of cabinet ministers over the years. So again, from afar, I got a chance to watch him sort of turn this skill that he had into a very, very viable thing, and see how he was able to craft stories. And ultimately, that comes down to, right? I mean, no matter what part of the arts that you're in, I think it's all about storytelling, and so the stories that he was able to tell on behalf of people that were very true, but was also be able to spin them in the right kinds of ways. I always found that to be very impressive. So when I ultimately started writing myself, he was very definitely one of the biggest influences.
So you would, and then your father would look at your stuff, and he would correct it. What some of the stuff, like how did it, like the first time you wrote Let's talk about that the first time. Because you know how it is the first time, it's like, oh my God.
Oh yes, and the first time that I ever showed my father anything that I wrote, and I think I was in high school at that point, I was very nervous because
How many times
here's
you
a
did
man
it
by,
before you go show it to him? How many times do you do it?
oh my gosh, it would have been, you know, the fourth or fifth iteration of whatever I was writing, knowing full well that he would still have stuff to say about it. But he was always really good because he was very encouraging about the subject matter, or at least, or in the drive to do it. He would have specific, you know, syntax things to say. He's a copy editor, so he would be, you know, telling me exactly where things weren't working, and maybe I needed to move things around. But I really appreciated that because ultimately that's what improved me as a writer, and ultimately when I edited other people's writings, I would always have his lessons in the back of my mind. And then when I became a film editor, it was exactly the same thing, because editing for film and edit on for copy is it's the same skill. It's just got different things that you're looking at, right? But taking things apart and kind of mixing around a little bit, massaging them in this way, you know, working it out in that way, it's really all the same thing. So I think that ultimately, even though I was the one who went into film and my father stayed in print, the lessons that he taught me as an editor have done nothing but help me in my own career as well.
So the first time that you wrote, what was your play about? Whatever you wrote, what was the first one that you wrote?
Oh, well, the very first thing that I wrote that I did was a short story that I was writing at the time, which never ultimately got published. But I mean, as far as, you know, things that I went into, I did a little bit of editorial stuff to begin with, then ultimately got into theater. I started to write things. I'd be in collective groups of people, you know, we would be doing like comedy shows that we would be putting on every week. So we'd be having to write comedy sketches. I was interested in drama, and I did a lot of acting in dramatic things, but as far as a writer was concerned, I tended to lean toward comedy until I got into sort of the historical realm in British Columbia, and then started to write things that were more serious and examining the history of the province and kind of what was happening here. And then ultimately started to adapt things to put into film, and that's where things really I really excel, I think.
So when you give your dad your first script, what were his questions and what happened? Because that's the beginning, that's the point that everything started, right? So tell me about that.
Sure. Well, I think
Wait, how were you feeling when you approached him? What happened when you looked at it? What was the facial? Give me the whole experience, like I'm there with you.
Well, you know, again, to be honest, I don't know if I remember the very first thing that I ever showed him, but
maybe some of the
but very certainly there were times, like I can remember the very first time that I wrote a horror story, because I'm really interested in the horror genre, both in film and writing. Stephen King is one of my favorite authors, and so I was writing something that was very specifically kind of geared toward that kind of audience. And I was nervous to do it because that's not at all what my father's interested in. You know, he's very much a very classic kind of literature sort of guy. So to sort of present him with something that was genre that he knew that I was interested in, and we didn't talk too much about horror, because as far as he was concerned, you know, that kind of stuff just grosses him out. So to be able to share with him, I was very nervous because I knew that the subject wasn't something that he was going to be particularly interested in. And he told me as much, like even after reading it, it's not something that he would normally really read ever at all. But he was proud of the fact that I had written it. He could tell there was a couple of places where I could be a little bit more dynamic in my approach to some of the paragraphs that I was writing, or I was you know, maybe being a little bit too verbose in some of the stuff, a little bit too purple with my prose. And because he's a career newspaperman, he's very used to getting to the punch really quick and being as brief as you possibly can. And I think that actually ultimately from that experience, as terrified as I was, and as maybe, I wouldn't say hurt, but when he had his criticisms, I was a teenager at the time, so I was like, okay. But the thing is that again, those lessons that I learned from him about being brief, about allowing the audience, or in this case, the reader, to fill in some of the blanks. You don't have to tell them absolutely everything, and you especially don't need to use adjectives and adverbs to do it. You can just be brief and simple. Kind of, my dad's a real big fan of Ernest Hemingway and his writing, which is very similar to that. John Steinbeck, very similar as well. It's that very matter of fact, this person said this person said this is what it looks like, let's go. And that allows your imagination to just completely start to create a world for yourself that isn't being completely dictated by the artist. And I think that that's a really important lesson for any artist to know, is that the audience that we have is a huge part of the experience. You have to let them do some of the work too.
Yeah, it's very interesting we talk about that. Sometimes you have people that work on scripts and things like that, right? And when you look, they explain the whole script. And I was like, what the heck is this?
Right.
Like, they're not children. You need to let them, figure some of the stuff out, wonder about some things. When you dictate everything and you give it to them, it doesn't make any sense, right? So and people they don't understand. That's why some movies are so beautiful, and some movies they never tell you. They leave you in mystery and suspense. You're like, you come out of the theater like, hey, what happened here?
Well, yeah, and then you're asking yourself and other people questions,
Yeah.
and it stays alive. David Lynch talks about that. David Lynch is one of my favorite directors, and he talks about this idea of the enduring mystery of a project, because as you tell everybody, when you tell them exactly what it is that you meant, they stop thinking about it. But if you don't, then it allows people to constantly be going back to it and trying to figure out exactly what it was. The answer's there in the project, but if you just spoon feed it to somebody, then that project goes away. Whereas if you allow them to sit and talk about it and think about it, it'll be with them forever.
That is very interesting, because sometimes you go to a theater and you come out, really for like weeks, you're thinking about like what happened there, what's the ending, you're trying to figure it out, and it's just like so bothersome that it makes you even think deeper about the project, right?
Yeah.
And when they come with a version 2, you're ready to go, right? And recently I've been saying they do that a lot lately. They leave you hanging, especially with some of the new shows that they're putting out, right? Like literally, like everything is so different. It wasn't like this a lot before. There's a lot of directors that they're doing this path to suck you in, right? So, what are some of your favorite movies?
Well, my top three favorite movies right now are John Carpenter's The Thing, which is a remake of The Thing from Another Planet, which is an old Howard Hawks, I think.
What year did it come out?
1982 is when John Carpenter's The Thing came out, and it was universally panned. The critics hated it. No audience members went and saw it. It was a huge bomb.
That's the one, the guy with the green thing, right?
No, it's about an alien that has been uncovered in the Antarctic that can change shape. So once it thaws itself out, it's taking over people's bodies and then pretending to be them. It's based on an old 1950s short story called Who Goes There? And so it's this tense thing. It's just a group of scientists in Antarctica who unfortunately have allowed this thing into their encampment. And so it's really a study in the growing paranoia of these men who've been alone for months in the middle of nowhere, and they can't trust each other anymore because they don't know which one of them is the thing and which one is the real person. And what was amazing about The Thing is that it was groundbreaking in its use of practical makeup effects. Like the team that did it, it was overseen by Rick Baker, but it was another fellow whose name escapes me right now, who actually did the makeup effects for it. It was so realistic and so grotesque that wasn't what a lot of the reviewers, why they couldn't stand the movie. They just thought it was unreasonably graphic. But in order to sort of give the sense of what it is that these people were dealing with, it was absolutely necessary. And having seen the film several times now, and only just, again, like 2 months ago I watched it, the makeup effects, like in a land, we are now in a world where CGI is
taking over.
But if you cannot compare a CGI effect to a really, really good practical effect, and John Carpenter's The Thing, now that it's 42 years old, still holds up in a way that a lot of movies wouldn't.
I want to see it now.
It's amazing. It's really great, and it's really great. It's for the performances. Kurt Russell is the star of it,
Yeah, oh, I
and he
love
was
that
kind of
guy,
at the
yeah,
height
yeah,
of his sort of later part of his career. Sir Wilford Brimley is in it as well. Like, it's just a really great stacked cast of people who are just pulling this thing off in a spectacular way. And again, it ends in a way that people have been talking about for 42 years, because you don't really know what happens at the end, because there's two guys left alive. One of them could be the thing. They don't know. The place that they've been in is completely burned, so neither of them are getting out of that circumstance, and they're just kind of looking at each other at the very end of games, you know, passing a bottle of whiskey back and forth, just being like, okay, well, one thing or the other is going to happen, and then it just ends, right? So it's an amazing film. I absolutely love
What
it.
did they think? Did it to kill the people or eat the people? Or?
It doesn't particularly eat them. It just absorbs them. So it absorbs all of their DNA and everything else, so that it can both grow. So I guess it's in for that.
Oh, it's
regard.
like a Play-Doh and
But yeah, but it then uses this absorbed DNA to be able to completely perfectly mimic that person's body. The grossest scenes in the film is when it attempts to, because how it infiltrates their camp is that it comes in the form of a husky. So they take it in and they put it in a cage with all of their huskies.
Oh my God.
And then it attempts to take over the entire kennel full of dogs. And that's how they ultimately find out what's happening, because it can't do it quickly enough for nobody to notice. But there's this amazing scene where these tentacles are coming out of this dog.
God.
It splits itself in half and it starts grabbing the other dogs and wrapping them up and then trying to become them. Again, for practical effects in the 1980s, it was spectacular to watch.
Don't you find it? It's off topic a little bit, but don't you find it that now the new CGIs are so fake now? Like they're doing a horrendous job of doing all this stuff, right? And I see a lot of movies now. They're going back to actual makeup. They're kind of leaving out the CGI because it's looking weird.
It is looking weird, and part of the reason I think is because people are trying to get people to do it for less and less money. I mean, if you look at CGI that was happening 20 years ago,
It's much better than what
it's much better than what we see now, and that doesn't make any sense at all. But yeah, I think it is because you've got these CGI companies that are out there, they're being contracted, so they're putting in it as the lowest bidder, and then suddenly realizing that they don't have the resources to get things done that they really should be done. And the studios are allowing it to pass because a lot of the stuff is flying straight to streaming, and they don't really care, right? So it's really unfortunate. I mean, I'm not dissing CGI artists and computer artists, because there are some amazing things that are happening, but I think it's the studios themselves and the people who aren't willing to spend the money to make one of the most important parts of your film work as well as it can.
You know, there's a saying in my culture. They say, the more you pay for soup, the more ingredients is going to be in the soup. If you pay $1, you're just going to get the bone broth. Right? Even if, right? You pay the $5, you get the bone broth, the meat, get the vegetables, you get the sauces, all that stuff, right? And I think that there is some, because our industry, right, is I guess is the most difficult industry. Because all the arts, they come together to make a film. It's not just one. It's like it's almost like a pizza pie. Everything comes together to make everything perfect, right? And I think it's the most expensive industry, right? Because you got the most talented people coming together, right? So what is happening when they do this? Like, they basically destroy the industry, right? When they undercut, you know, when they when they don't give enough money for the CGI, right? What is the company supposed to do? They have to cut the corner somewhere, right?
Yeah.
And it comes to these like CGIs that are horrible, right?
Yeah.
And by not knowing them, they're destroying their own credibility, right? If you look at different studios, right? Now you know which film is gonna be like, you know, you don't want to watch it anymore, right?
Yeah.
And then you know which movie they put a lot of energy into it. So this is something crazy that I've been noticing a lot lately. Everybody's trying to do it, you know, for the cheapest. And now sometimes they outsource to other countries, right?
Yep.
Which they don't have better technology, you know, equipment, right?
Right.
And it even gets worse.
Yeah.
Crazy. So talk about so what's your favorite film? So the first one.
Okay, so that was my first favorite film.
Have you seen the remake of this The Thing? Is there a remake of it or no?
Well, there was so there was an original one that was from the 1950s
Yeah.
called The Thing from Another World, or yeah, I think that's what it's called. Then John Carpenter in the 80s remade that movie. Then in the 2010s, somewhere like 2010, 2011, they made a prequel to John Carpenter's The Thing.
Yeah. How was it?
Well, here's why it was back. Well, script-wise, it wasn't as good, but what it was really interesting because it basically told the story leading up to John Carpenter's film, and they did all of the effects practically. But the studio then came in and decided they needed to do a CGI layover of all of the practical effects, and that's what ruins that film. It's not as great a script. It's as well acted, but it's still interesting. But the problem is the CGI looks terrible. And to know that they had done it all practically first, and then were second guessed by the studio, who then paid somebody to do bad CGI over top of it, it just fails in comparison to the first one so much that people don't even really talk about it all that much anymore. I mean, it's available on streaming; you can see it.
What did it look like? Is it the one they're in the snow and things like that?
Yeah, it's in the Antarctic.
And that thing,
as well,
he opens up, you know.
Yeah, it's that one.
Oh, okay, I know what you mean. I've seen that one. Yeah, you're right. It wasn't. I cannot say anything bad about it, but it wasn't what I was expecting. Exactly. I mean, yeah, it's just like everything was very interesting about it. You know, so, what is your second?
So my second favorite is David Lynch's Fire Walk with Me, which is again a prequel to a television series, Twin Peaks. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Twin Peaks, but it was like a really big deal in 1990 when it first came out. It was a limited series, and it's about the murder of a girl in a small town in Washington. She's the homecoming queen, and an FBI agent who's brought into town to investigate the murder. And so over the course of 7 episodes, it leads up to this climax where you think that you're finally going to find out who murdered this girl, and it doesn't happen. It ends on a cliffhanger, and that outraged so many people. And I remember at the time, because I was like just about to graduate high school when it happened. But then the second season came along, and it does ultimately solve the mystery. But it ended after 2 seasons. Like, it was a really big, like, national thing or international sensation when it first came out. And then people, and that's what David Lynch had said, was like, if you solve the mystery, because he didn't ever want the mystery to be solved. He's like, if you solve it, people will stop watching the show. And then ultimately they were pressured by the network to solve the mystery and try and do something new with it. And once they did that, he left. He was like, I'm not doing this anymore because we're done. You had a goose that laid the golden egg, and now you've just killed the goose. So I'm going to go off and do some other things. But he still was interested in the world that he had helped create with Mark Frost, who was the writer, his co-writer on it. Mark Frost, who was behind Hill Street Blues. So after the show ended, he decided he was going to make the prequel, which was the events leading up to the murder of Homecoming Queen, because that's already happened by the time the series starts. And it's brutal. Like it is like Twin Peaks. One of the things, what reasons people liked it, was because it was kind of goofy, right? It's this goofy, kitschy. It's got a real murder at its heart, but it's got elements of being a soap opera. It's got little elements of being a sitcom. It's stylistically gorgeous, so it's really fun to watch. Fire Walk with Me is not fun. It is not a fun movie at all. It's like David Lynch said, okay, well, you had your fun. Now I'm going to show you what this story was actually about. And there's also weird, like, mystical things that are all a part of it, like this. It's got this crazy kind of otherworldly aspect to it. But in the heart of it, it's about the murder of a very troubled girl in a very small town by somebody who she knew and trusted. And I think Lynch was kind of like, well, okay, we enjoyed this thing. Now I'm going to tell you what this story is really about, and it's harrowing. Like, it's a really good movie. It's very entertaining. But when you really look at it, and especially the way it ends, because it ends with her murder, it leaves you very unsettled. Like, after watching it in the theater the first time when it came out in 1991. Just thinking, I can't believe, I don't even know what I just saw. Like, it was a visceral experience.
You're shocked,
right? I've seen it several times since, and it has aged very, very well. It was not critically well received at the time that it came out either, although it did make a splash at the Cannes Film Festival when it premiered there. But it's so perfectly put together. It's so well designed. So each piece of it has an efficiency to the way he's telling the story and a build up to what the end ultimately becomes. It's one of my favorite pieces of cinema
You
ever.
might want to go see it now.
I hope that you do. However, I would, as a fan of Twin Peaks, suggest that you have to watch the entirety of Twin Peaks first before you watch it. But it's only like 29 episodes, so you know,
only,
yeah.
only 20. What's your third movie that you
My third favorite is a David Cronenberg film.
Okay.
Canadian director David Cronenberg, who early in his career was primarily for being a horror director. He then branched into sort of more subversive dramas. But he did an adaptation of a graphic novel called A History of Violence. And it stars Mortensen, who was in Lord of the Rings and such. And Maria Bello, Ed Harris is in it, John Hurt. And it's just this lovely little crime movie about a guy who runs a diner in this small town, who he's mistaken for being the brother of a big crime boss, Philadelphia, because of an incident that occurs at his diner, in which he defends a bunch of people from a couple of loose cannon kills. And as a result, Bob from Philadelphia is after him because they think that he is this guy that he knew 20 years ago, and they want revenge on some stuff that he may or may not have done. And so it, the whole thing, the tension of the film is this guy that we have learned is our protagonist, the person that we love, this very mild-mannered family man. Is he who he says he is, or is he who they say he is? And if he's who they say he is, what's going to happen at the end of that movie? And I won't say anything more about it because you should definitely watch it if you haven't seen it. It's available on streaming. It's called A History of Violence.
History of Violence.
Yeah.
Does the ending leaves you with a cliffhanger?
No.
Oh, thank God.
No,
Yeah,
the ending of that movie
yeah.
is very clear about what happens.
Awesome.
I mean, it gives you a little bit of it's a little bit open end to what's going to happen to this character now that the events of the film have occurred. But no, it very clearly tells you what's going on by the time you're finished.
That is amazing. So your favorite genre is horror film, right?
Yeah, I would say, I think overall horror is my favorite, just because I find it the most fun, and I like to I like to fantasize. It's not about horrific things, but I like to face my fears in that way. Like I don't like it when bad things happen to me in real life, but I do like imagine how I would get out of certain circumstances if they were happening to me. But I like thrillers. I'm game for a good murder mystery, that kind of thing. I'd like straight up dramas and comedies as well. But I think if I were going to gravitate toward one specific thing, it would be horror. Yeah.
Tell me some of the things you like about horror. Some of the really like things that stand out for you, because you write for horror also, right?
Yeah, I do. I think what I like, it actually comes down to this. In a way, it's the same thing about acting in general, right? The idea of acting is portraying truth, or at least the illusion of truth, in unrealistic circumstances, right? The characters that you play are usually regular people who find themselves in extraordinary circumstances. You as an actor are trying to be as truthful as you can be, but you've got a camera right face and lights all around, and you have to be able to figure out how to make a believable performance, right? And horror is like that too, because horror generally, the best kinds of horror take absolutely regular, everyday people and put them into circumstances that are so far off the map of anything that they've ever experienced before, and the stakes are high. It's usually life or death, right? And so to be able to see how, or craft how these normal, everyday people can, if not survive, at least get to the very end of that story before they before they're kicked off, they're dead. It's fascinating to me. I just love that idea. Just looking at normal, everyday people and the pressures that they're suddenly under and how they perform in those circumstances.
You know, something very interesting. You know, when you do like action films, you know, hero films, all that stuff, it's pretty easy to kind of come up with those like acting skills, right? When it comes to horror, I guess what you mean is much more difficult because now you have to convince the audience, which is us, that you're that character.
Yeah, yeah.
How do you do that? Like, talk about some of the things that you can do to do something like this, because it's pretty difficult. It's not for everybody.
It is not for everybody. It's and not even for every actor. Like there are some actors very, very good at the specific things that they do, but getting in touch with this idea of the darkness that is inside all of us. The most realistic portrayals, which can be some of the most harrowing performances, are where people can actually put themselves in a circumstance and try to adequately connect with how they would respond realistically, naturally in that situation. And you have to have an imagination to be able to do that. And or you have had to have gone through some enough things in your life that you can personalize and kind of substitute something that happened to you with the thing that's happening now. Hopefully none of us have ever been in a situation where we've been chased around the house by a masked serial killer, carrying a knife. But to imagine what that would actually be like, and to not perform it, but to actually feel it. There's something very extraordinary about that, and it does take a particularly good type of actor. And I think one of the reasons why I like horror so much is that it's a very underrated genre. You don't see a lot of horror movies that are getting nominated for Academy Awards, especially in acting, right? But you look at some of the people who have been through even some of the schlockier horror movies that you've seen, the Scream Queens that people talk about. I don't think they get enough credit for what they actually are able to do. Like the performances that they are providing make us believe that they're actually in that circumstance. It's not an easy thing to do, and because it's horror, it kind of gets brushed aside as being just one of those things that kids like, or teenagers, or whatnot. And I don't know. I think there are a lot of really, really excellent performances out there that people don't even know about because they're in horror movies.
Yeah. So what is the difference between acting and then feeling and acting?
The difference is, you as an actor, you have to be in control of what you're doing. Right, so there are many like there's the whole concept of acting that was really popular late 50s, 60s, right? So method acting was something that was developed by a fellow named Lee Strasberg, and Strasberg was an acting teacher and actor himself and director in New York in the 40s and 50s and into the 60s, I think. But he had actually gone to see a lecture by a fellow named Konstantin Stanislavski. And Stanislavski was a very popular Russian theater director at the turn of the 20th century and into the decades after that, who wrote a book called An Actor Prepares. And that book was really it was a sort of a fictionalized account of a young student's time at a theater school in Russia. But what Stanislavski was doing was actually writing an acting textbook. So it reads like a novel, but it's a textbook on how to act in a realistic fashion. But what he did, he went around and interviewed, because he worked very closely with Anton Chekhov, who was also a playwright and theater director at the time. And Stanislavski was interviewing all of these really successful European actors, saying, well, what is it that you like? What's part of your process? And then he would take all of that, synthesize it, and then write it into this story. He wrote a number of other books too, but that's kind of the most popular one for actors. That's
his best book, I guess.
Yeah, I think for beginning actors to read, that's definitely his best book. It's the most accessible. But what he was saying was, in order to really, what he learned from all these other actors, in order to effectively perform, like you need to obviously figure out some of the physical attributes of the character that you're playing, and you have to kind of think about things that they would do. So like if they're wearing pants, that would have like what kind of changes in their pocket, like how does it feel to be on the coat in? If they're particular farming background, like what does that like? Strasberg was an American who to a lecture that Stanislavski delivered, took a bunch of notes, and then created his own theory with that. And he went a little bit further into a direction that Stanislavski was never intending, which was, in order to effectively play a character, you need to know what that character has gone through. You need to have lived in that character's skin. And that became incredibly popular in the 50s, 60s with film actors because it's more immediate, right? You don't have to repeat the same performance night after night for 8 shows a week. You have to do it now in this moment. So I could see how people wanting to internalize this idea of acting. So the idea behind the method basically is the emotion, it's your emotional core first, and then everything comes out from there. A lot of people have taken that to the extreme, right? Daniel Day-Lewis is a really famous, sort of more recent example of a method actor. And you know, when he was filming Last of the Mohicans, he went out and lived in a cabin in the woods with no electricity and no, you know, running water and stuff just for the entire time that they were shooting. And you know, people had to address him as the character that he was. There's a lot of examples of that with method actors. Pardon me. So the idea is that they feel like they have to actually go through the things that the character's gone through in order to effectively provide that kind of performance. And it becomes a little bit more about trying to force or to evoke these actual feelings than it is about acting them. And so that can be really problematic because it can cause problems on set. And if you're an actor in the theater, it can be very problematic because things take time and they have to get themselves into emotional state every single time. Whereas my theories on acting, which are not mine, they're just you know, a whole collection of other people's that I've read and people that I've experienced with, some of the very best actors can make you believe they're going through those things without actually having to go through them. And it comes down to this idea of self-control, because if you are actually putting yourself into an emotional state that you cannot get out of because you are actually feeling these emotions, you're actually suddenly now a liability to the production that you're involved in, right? But if you are able to touch those feelings and to a point where you can bring them out in such a way that the audience, because really the only person that we need to care about, right? It's not therapy for me. It's I'm entertaining an audience. So if the audience believes that I'm going through that, that's great. But I need to turn that on and off. I need to be able to go from this moment where you think that I'm absolutely terrified with everything that's happening in my life, to being able to go to the next scene and be very smiley and happy, and then to be able to go and talk to people at the crafts table and not be a jerk. You know, so I get a little bit suspicious of actors who feel like the only way that they can make their performance work, they are absolutely that person all of the time.
That becomes hard, right?
I think it's a bit self-indulgent, to be perfectly honest. We as actors, just like the directors, just like the grips, just like you know, we have a job to do, and the job is to ultimately to entertain the people that are watching our productions. And we also need to get along. We need to work on this, right? So, yeah, that's me. Is that I think there is a real difference between acting it and feeling it. The line is very blurry, absolutely. And you know, in classes I teach that we want you to put yourself as far as you can toward actually feeling something, but also be able to pull yourself back. You need to, right?
Without a mental breakdown, right? I mean,
yeah, nobody wants that.
So talk about some of the things that you've seen, some of the dangers of this type of thing. I know some people in the film, some people they lost extreme amount of weight. Some people like they put themselves in a lot of harm. What are some of the things that you think are not a good?
Well, I've certainly seen that. I've seen people starve themselves. You know, it's interesting because, you know, we live in a society where thin is king, you know, all the time. Anyway, so sometimes I
harder
think
to be thin.
Well, right, but and you know, and there's this whole thing about, you know, people look better on camera if they're thinner anyway. So there's a whole raft of eating disorders throughout the acting community as it stands, and so that part in itself is unfortunate.
Talk about that a little bit. So there's I guess you're right. A lot of it's just like the fashion industry, right? So a lot of actors and actresses, because they always want to look good on camera, actually destroying your own health, right? They're doing ridiculous diets. Do you want to talk about some of that?
Well, just that I think, and I can see why. You know, especially if you reach a certain level of popularity, it doesn't even have to be like your face is all over Entertainment Weekly magazine or anything. But if you have a certain number of people that are watching you all the time, and you're able to actually judge yourself because you're seeing the things, right? Like as a theater actor, it's different. You're on stage in front of people, you're getting the response, the immediate response now, but you don't ever get to see that performance. You don't ever see what you actually looked like on stage. And that I think is a gift to actors. This idea that they can at any time see pictures of themselves in magazines and or see themselves on television and criticize themselves for the way they perceive they look, not the way that everybody else necessarily even sees them. Especially culture like ours that is so weight obsessed. It is a tremendous amount of stress that is put on somebody, and my heart goes out to people who do that for a living, put themselves out there to constant criticism, especially now that we have the internet, right? Because before it was just people writing in gossip magazines or in the newspapers. Now it's everywhere all the time, and there are thousands of people that are doing it. So how could that not just put a tremendous amount of pressure on somebody to try and stay as thin as they possibly can, especially then as they age, you know, because they're wanting to keep their jobs, and it's a youth-obsessed culture as well. So the better you look, the longer you're going to work. I don't even think that it's necessarily. I think it's more a North American thing than it is an international thing. Like when I look at the film industries in other countries and
they don't
see
care.
they don't care, and people age naturally, getting their faces all cut up or anything like that. You know, they're being given an opportunity to be who they are and the talent that they are on screen in a way that they're not I think they're pressured against here, especially with the big blockbuster kinds of things, right? So yeah, there is I think in the film industry in particular, there is a real danger for people to fall into that trap. And then of course, if they're doing things for a role, then they get to do it for, you know, like Christian Bale is a great example. I mean, he's a great actor, right? But machinist, like
that's what I was talking about.
I mean, that is brutal. Like, he could have killed himself. And then to go to the opposite ends when he's playing like Dick Cheney or something like that, and he gains 50 pounds, like that whole thing. Again,
your body.
I hope to God you've got a good team of medical experts that are helping you all the way through that, because otherwise you're going to do some serious damage to your body.
People think they're invincible until some health thing happens.
Yeah.
Then doesn't matter how long and tough you are. That by itself can knock you out. Like career, there's a lot of actors actually there. They had to take themselves out because of some of the things they've done. You know? The funny thing, you mentioned, you know, foreign films and whatnot. When you watch a foreign film, the character is the character. The character is playing the person's life, right? And most of them, I'll be honest with you, they're not like bodybuilders. They don't have nice tools. They don't have that stuff. That's why it's so beautiful when you watch these films, right? The Japanese films, you know, there's like all cultural kind of. And in those cases, they don't care what you look like. They care if you can act,
Right.
And this thing is getting out of hands, like especially superhero movies now, right? And it's unnatural to have that much muscle. Like it's almost, you know how many you have to work out. Like,
Oh, it's incredible.
it's insane, right?
Yeah.
It's not sustainable, right? There is an actor, I'll make it a name. He says for a character, been praying for a while. In shape for that character actually damage his body. He's still dealing with the health issues and things like that because he had to put so much muscle on at the same time and do rigorous training.
Oh,
right?
I bet. Yeah.
And nobody talks about it. Oh, you see the glory.
Yeah. And then if they're gonna take their shirt in the scene, they stop drinking water for like 3 days before the scene, just so that their skin sucks really tight against the muscles.
Oh, I didn't know that they don't
yeah.
drink water. They do fasting for like that.
They do, yeah.
What does it do? So when you fast,
Well, because it dehydrates the body, right? It's the same thing that professional bodybuilders will do before they go into competition. Like they'll build up bulk, and then they'll sort of refine that bulk through other kinds of training. But then right before competitions, I don't know if it's 3 days, but at least like a day before, they stop any kind of fluids going into their bodies at all to allow their body, because then their body absorbs all of the moisture that's
Yeah.
in there,
Yeah.
and it just basically sucks their skin right down their muscles, so they just look extra ripped, right? And Chris Hemsworth talked about that with Thor, and
Yeah.
Hugh Jackman has also mentioned it when playing Wolverine. Like
That's what I was
he's
saying,
had
but I
to
didn't
do
want to
that,
name
right?
him.
Oh, sorry.
I didn't. I know. Exactly. Well, he's saying his body got damaged actually because of this, right? What kind of damage? Yes, probably some back stuff, you know.
I'm sure.
Because of the character, he's always on suspense, so he's just jumping.
Yeah.
This is crazy. Um, realize that it's very difficult on the organs, eh?
Yeah.
You know, because your organs, you know, they hydration, you know, it's not gonna be good for it, right? So that is great. Yeah, I have so much questions. Talk about favorite acting. You mentioned it a little, right? So what is your favorite style of acting? So you bring a little bit of both and you make something in between, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think if I'm looking at those sort of old school acting coaches,
Yeah.
Sanford Meisner is the one who has spoken to me the most. And he was actually a student of Strasberg's, but kind of branched off a little bit and said, well, maybe there is a blending of the both of them. There is stuff that we need to do. So the idea is that, you know, through, obviously through, how's the best way to put it? So if Stanislavski was like from the outside in, like find out what's in your pocket, what's going on in, are you doing something in the scene that's going to stop you from thinking about what you need to do, you know, what kind of characterization. And then Strasberg was from the inside out, feel it first then
push it
build
up.
it out. Meisner was a little bit of both of things, I think. He was just like, let's find the naturalism in the way that people talk. One of the exercises that I will often do with actors from any level, from beginning actor right through to people we're rehearsing on set, is a simple repetition exercise. Because I think when people memorize lines, they have a tendency to get it into their head in a way that very rote, right? They fantasize about the way the scene is going to go, so they memorize those lines exactly that way. And so when it actually comes to being in a scene like the two of us together, you're saying your lines the way you think that they should be said. I am saying the lines the way I think that they should be said, and it becomes stilted because they're not really meeting. Where you really want is the connection when we're just having a conversation, right? And we're looking at each other in the eyes, and you say something in a way that makes me think of something, and then I will then say my next words differently because we're having this conversation for the very first time.
Natural.
And, yeah, and so Meisner's repetition technique was, let's get two actors to stand just a couple of feet apart, look at each other in the eyes, and at some point, one of those actors is going to say one word. It doesn't matter what that is, just one word. It could be dog, right? It could be cat. Then the idea is that the next actor is meant to naturally react to that and repeat that word back, having experienced what has just come at me. So you're like, dog, and I'm like, dog, and you're like, dog, right? Like we just go back and forth, and we have full-on conversation using our eyes and our expressive faces and one word that absolutely no sense. But regardless, we wind up having a very naturalistic conversation that, you know, you allow that exercise on for quite a long time. Then there's a next phase, which is if you are working with actors who have memorized a scene, get them to do this repetition exercise for 5 minutes before until at one point, then direct them to jump into their lines. And suddenly they're having a natural conversation. They're not thinking about how they're delivering their lines. They're just delivering them, going back and forth in this very natural conversation between two people. That's just a very basic idea, but and it's not everything that Meisner had to talk about, but it's a very simple exercise for me that allows people to calm themselves down, get themselves out of their heads, and just react in the moment, because that honestly is the best part of acting. There's a difference between being engaged and being engaged. And the best actors are engaged with what's going on.
Give a meaning of that.
So
Explain it
engaging, so a lot of people when they first come into acting, they think, I've got a really outgoing personality. People love me. I like to be the center of attention. I want everybody to have their eyes on me all the time, right? And that's an engaging person. That's somebody who wants to be the focus of everyone's attention. Whereas being engaged is actually paying attention to everybody else that's going on, everything else that's going on around you, and the people who are there with you. And if everybody's concentrating more on being interested in what's happening around them rather than being the most interesting person in the room, that's where real performances happen, right? Because you're watching, you're listening, you're reacting in real time. You're actually listening to what this person is saying to you, and you're going to actually then emotionally connect even more with the material that you have to deliver because you're allowing that emotional reaction to happen to because it's intake of that energy from somebody, right? So rather than being the most interesting person in the room, be the most interested person in the room. And the camera is going to love you because the camera is going to see that. It's going to see everything that's going on inside your brain as you're actually listening and reacting for real to what the person around you is saying. And as a director, I'm sure you've seen that too, right? There are so many people who, once their lines are over, they stop listening, right? So they don't,
it's like shooting into the blank.
Yeah, you're not going to want to cut to them because
there's nothing. It's empty. It's I don't know what they call it. It's like, I call it empty acting, right? So you just said yourself, but there's really nothing there.
Yeah, and you can rehearse it a million times so that it sounds perfect.
But it's not good on camera because the camera will see it and the audience will feel it if it's not real.
Yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah.
You're right. It goes into that they want to be, I guess, the loudest voice in the room. Maybe it doesn't work, right? Even in public spaces, right? Nobody likes the person who's just just the loudest. Unless there's something extremely interesting that they're talking about, or the subject is so deep, but then the emotional we get involved, and then
sure, yeah, and some people that's their role. They're doing a TED talk. They're stage. They're doing their thing. Yeah. That's what they're supposed to be doing.
But they read the room. The best ones, they always read the room.
Absolutely.
To see how people feel, so they can change a little bit, right?
Yeah.
So that's amazing.
So that's really, to me, that is the best piece of acting advice I can give anybody. Is just be engaged with everything that's going. Really listen. Really allow yourself to react in the moment. And then don't about the words. As long as you have them, they'll come out. I mean, Spencer Tracy said the secret to acting was to remember your lines and don't bump into the furniture. And that's really true. Part of it is so easy, really. If you are allowing yourself to be engaged in the moment.
What do you think about improvising? I really like people change the script a little bit to make it their own. And then it takes a totally different kind of a personality. I think there's a couple of actors who do that, and they always make the thing better. What do you think about that when they contribute to something like that?
I think it's a great thing to do. A couple of things. I mean, improvisation itself is a fantastic skill. It's one of the things that we teach at our school because every actor should be forced to be in a situation where they're making stuff all the time because it just gets you thinking about what's going on.
It depends on the character, right?
And it also causes you to pay attention. You have to pay attention to what's going on around you if you're going to be an effective improviser. I do think there's something to be said for the script that's written, and I know there are certain actors who will be letter perfect and they do not want to improvise outside of the script at all. They have reverence for the screenwriter. In theater, a little different because you really do have to be letter perfect. In film, I think it is better when you give people opportunity to play around a little bit, or at the very least to just word it differently, right? Like they might have all of the concepts, you got everything that you need. You're not going to take the scene, it's not going to go off the rails, and you're going to suddenly be in a different movie, right? But it as long as you give them free rein to just be like, don't worry if you don't say the words right, just see what it is
that you feel.
And there are some actors who are particularly good at it, and I think the ones who are particularly experienced at it, and that's the key. That's when you can allow them to really kind of start crafting new parts of a character and or a scene in itself because they've been around so long, they know how to make it work. The danger is, I think there are some young actors who come out thinking that's the way they should do things.
Well, they don't have enough
experience. And they can be disruptive on set because they don't have enough experience. And, but I do think improvisation is really great. there have been times I have been a little bit more slavish to the text, but I would like to say to them, to actors, okay, well, just do it this way a couple of times, exactly like this.
Yeah.
And then a couple of times we'll do it in a different way, and we'll just kind of mess things up a little bit and see what happens, because that's the magic of film, right? Is that you never know when you're just going to hit. Everything's going to align in that one moment. You know, somebody might have been distracted, something that happened off camera, and yet folded it into their performance, and then suddenly they're alive in a way that the camera definitely picks up on, and you can't deny yourself that kind of opportunity.
You know something very interesting. Very experienced actors, right? When you give them the crypto character, right? They study it so much, they learn about it so much that they know the character better than you who wrote it. So when they improvise, you're seeing all this crazy stuff that you could have thought about, but it's coming out of them because they really are the character now, right? And that always blows my mind away when I see something like that, right? They take the word, they change it, they make it stronger, or they do a scene differently, right? Even the body movement and things like that. And that exactly goes with what you're saying. When they're experienced, they're good at improvising. But when they're not, they destroy the character.
Right. And it's
So
like,
what
what?
stick to your life.
But yeah, I think the best actors will do that.
Yeah.
And it's great as a writer to that's why we're collaborative
Do
medium.
not be stuck.
Yeah,
Right?
if we just wanted our words to be exactly the way they are, we'd read books, right? This is film. Like we're around 100 people who are all focused on the same thing. So if I can give you a script and you can say, well, you know, I think I'm going to do it this way. See what you think. And then suddenly you've opened up the whole world of that character to me. Like, why would I stop you from doing that? That's what it's all
They're
about.
improving your character, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of good films they've done like this. There's actors that they can do these kind of things, right? So it's always interesting. But there's a lot of writers. There's a lot of directors. They're very rigid, right? And you can see that in the quality of the film that comes. There's no emotions really. There's flow. There's something missing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like very structured. You can see in the faces of the actors, like everybody's like, it's so harsh. It's like, what is this? Especially some of the shows, TV shows. Right? That's why this sucks so bad because everybody's like, the robots, right? So you might as well hire AI. That's going to be the new thing. The robots are going to be acting for us. Right?
They're trying.
It's crazy.
Well, and I do think it's funny. I just recently saw something, a talk that Ethan Hawke, the actor Ethan Hawke, was giving. And he said the same thing. Again, no diss to cinematographers. But he was talking about how if you look at a lot of the people that are coming up through the ranks who've gone to film school, they start really as cinematographers. So they're looking at the frame and the beauty of the frame and how the camera angles and all of this, the technical part. And then he was saying, but if you look at some of the best directors who've actually ever come through the cinema, they're all actors first.
Yeah.
And Wells, Clint Eastwood, like all of these people. And he's like, because they come at it from a perspective of the character and the story and what's going to be like, why am I moving this direction? Yeah, it might look good on camera, but why that happening? And so to create this thing, I think there are two very different kinds of filmmakers, and some of them are very much about the picture, whereas some of them are very much about the story. And I tend to be a story person, although I do like pretty pictures too.
Same here. I like both, but if your actor is acting and gibberish is coming out of his mouth or her mouth, which is beautiful, nobody's gonna care.
Nobody's gonna care.
Because nobody can connect emotionally, right? Because acting is an emotional kind of a thing, right? You want to hook your viewers to the character as soon as you can, so they can experience the rocks, right? But when you have like all these weird lines and things are like robotic, nobody wants to see that. There's no connection. It's like, oh, that film felt so bad. Why? But I worked so hard. The pictures were great. The music was good. So and so did that. So and so did that. But the characters, you didn't work enough to make your characters perfect, right?
Yeah.
And I think this is pretty common now. I guess. The more emerging filmmakers that come in the scene, I've seen a lot of movies. I'm not gonna name it, but there's a lot with big budget that is like that. Like the character, like things are bad. The acting is horrible because I think they didn't let people to be themselves to some degree,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Right? Because they give that thing. So what do you think about that?
I agree, and to be perfectly honest, as much as I really do like some of the stuff that Disney is producing, for
Yeah.
example,
If I can, your call.
I think that is the main failing of the latest 3 Star Wars movies.
Yeah.
You know, the fact is they had some fantastic actors in that cast.
Great,
They had incredible
CGI,
technicians. The CGI was top notch.
Yeah.
There was no story. There was no attention to being paid to the story and or the lines and or the direction. And there's some J.J. Abrams is a decent director, but again he comes from that school of let's make it really good and be kind of convoluted in its plot, and not actually allowing people. Now that's a genre thing. It's Star Wars, but at the time, if you look at the original movie, like
it has intense in it.
it does,
It's
right?
It's crazy, beautiful. Like
Yeah.
like the first they make the 3 last ones, right? So
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
it
like the
was-
middle trilogy, A New
Yeah.
Hope, Empire, and Return of the Jedi were the first 3 movies.
yeah, so those movies I remember they're very emotional. Like like you see the emotions coming out, you see the character, you can, but so now what they made is totally different. You didn't feel it at all.
No,
Right?
to me it's like
It's like chore. Everybody's on chore.
it felt like the cutscenes from a really expensive video game to me. You know, like the little story bits that get you through while you're playing. It didn't for me at all. And there are others that aren't Disney and aren't Star Wars that are the same way.
There's a lot of films being made like that.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I don't know what is going on, right? And doesn't make sense, right? You have all this big budget. You got the most talented people on the planet to come work on your films, and then you put this out, and it fails at the box office, and you're like, why? It's
Yeah.
like you forgot the most basic element of your film, the actors and the
Yeah.
actresses,
Yeah.
right? The people that bring the emotion, right? Because if you think of it, right? Everything in the film is on the actors. Nobody cares about the director or anybody else, right? The makeup is on the actors. The lights are on the actors. The camera is on the actors. The story is about the actor. The whole freaking thing is about the actor. And for you to fail the most important part of it and not let it be what it's supposed to be, it's like it's epic for me. I don't understand it. Right?
But I can also, as a director, I can understand how that happets too, especially if you're somebody who's been brought into a big budget kind of tentpole thing. There's a lot at stake. Like I have it from a very much smaller perspective, but there's definitely been films, one in particular that I can think of that I made that we didn't have enough time to make it. We had very little budget. There were producers breathing down my neck all the time to make sure that we were getting through certain pages and everything, and that it had all of these certain elements to it, which meant that I didn't have an opportunity to work with the actors that I wanted to. I was just making sure that they were standing and trusting that they could do their performances. And they did good jobs. But the film could have been way better if we'd actually been given the time and just the confidence from the executives to take the time to say, okay, well, let's work through this. And maybe we need to rework the script a little bit here to make it something that people actually want to see. And so and that's like on a $250,000 budget. If you're looking at a $200 million budget, I can imagine the immense amount of pressure that is on the people who are at the helm of that thing to get things done on time, on budget. It's not an excuse, but I can understand it at least, I think.
I think because all these movies have deadlines, right? I think it's sometimes to extend the deadline and then work with the characters and make them better than just release it, right? Because what is happening is become a factory now.
Yeah.
Like, here you go, you're the director, this is your deadline, you got to do it like this, right? And then that's it, right? And if you don't perform, you get stressed out, and then you don't want the director to be stressed out. And a stressful director to be a crappy project. I'm serious, right? Because you have to go and you have to see everything, like something is in your mind.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't know why these why these studios don't realize.
Well, going back to Stanislavski, who we were talking about before, the Russian theater director, there's a very famous instance where he and his, because he was in the National Theater at the time, he was the head of it. They rehearsed for 4 months a play, and at the end of 4 months, he was like, you know what, this is not good. We're not going to, and they never performed it. They just never were able to gel in exactly the way it was supposed to be. The script just didn't quite work for what they wanted, and he just used to put it out. They just went off and did something else instead. And as painful as that must have been for all of the people involved, there is something to that idea. Like we've worked really, really hard. Do we want the legacy of what we've been doing to be this? Maybe we don't.
You know, they say that you're as good as last work in our industry, right? So,
right.
And it's just like product development. If your product is not when you put it out, right, then it's not going to do good, right? So sometimes it's better to lose, but you're not losing actually, because all that stuff you did is going to go to another project, right?
Yeah.
I think there's no lose situation, because if that things come out, right, and it's horrible. You know how the critics are, right?
Yes.
They're gonna destroy it. Your whole like career, right?
Oh yeah, yeah.
And especially as you say, in the old days, it was more like magazines, newspapers, and things. Right now, it's instant. Literally, your film right now, and in like 10 minutes, TikTok, all this, everything.
Oh yeah.
You're already getting rules, right?
Totally. And they're doing that for the trailers for movies. Like they're judging whether they're going to go see a film. You know, I mean, obviously that's what it's for. Yeah. But if suddenly you're getting review bomb in your trailer. Yeah. And then nobody's going to go see because that's what's in the mindset of everybody.
And you know, the more the economy gets more difficult, people are going to be very stingy with their money, right? And then their time, right? They're like, okay, the trailers suck. What should I go and watch this movie? Well, I can go do something else, right? So, and then I guess this is something that the studios are using now, right? Because I think in the last months, couple of movies came out that they didn't even meet what the budget put into the film. Right. And now something slowly starting to click in, right? And I guess maybe it needs to be, right? So they take it easier on the director so they can do their job properly. Make it easier on the actors so they can do it, right? So because you don't want to have somebody acting for like around 10 hours a day, something like that. It's gonna be horrible, right?
Yeah.
Right? It's just like it's crazy. It was such an interesting subject. Nobody talks about it, right? Again,
it's true.
Same thing like with the makeup artist, right? Everybody thinks it's like such a glorious thing to do, right? So, talk about some of your acting experience.
My favorite acting experience is the stage acting experience. I'm gonna backtrack one. So my first time that I ever toured across Canada with a show.
Oh, wow! You turned. You didn't say anything.
Yeah. So once I'd gotten out of theater school and I was doing a lot of like small independent productions and then some other things, I had an opportunity to work with a great group of people. One of whom a fellow TJ Daw, who is now quite a darling in Canadian theater circles. He's a monologuist primarily, like it's a sort of a Spalding Gray kind of thing where he relates stories to his life and weaves them all together in a story. And he got his start on the Canadian Festival circuit. And that's the Fringe festivals are where, it's based on the Edinburgh Fringe model, but a number of different centers across Canada have Fringe theater festivals are the plays that don't make it into the mainstream. So, small companies that don't have big hits or experimental works, plays that are brand new, that are kind of play testing themselves before they move on to the national stage. They can often get their start at Fringe festivals. And so there's a whole network of them that happen right from the East Coast to the West Coast. And if you're lucky enough, you can actually hit every single one of those Fringe festivals on a months-long tour. So as a traveling artist, that works really well because you have one show and you're going from center to center to center all the way across. And the better you do in the earlier towns, the more reviews that you get. People get excited, and then by the time you finish the tour, you'll be making some really good money. But the first Fringe tour that TJ and I ever went on together was a play called Never Sloan, which was an early play of a Toronto playwright named Dan Hiver, who's gone on to be quite a prominent Canadian playwright. But this was an early show of his. None of his shows had ever been taken outside of Toronto before, so he was kind of excited that we were going to do his play, and it was a really and the idea of the play is that it's two men in business suits who are standing on a beach.
Yeah.
And there's a woman in a light uniform sitting on a lifeguard above them. That's the most real that the play actually is, because it's really about anticipated movements and the rhythms of speech, and it's set up in a way where these two men are competing with each other to see who is the better man. Yeah. You know, who has the best suit, who has the best car, who has the best life, the job, and everything else. And it's set up as like a series of backgrounds, right, where they basically combat each other with talking about how they are, and the lifeguard is keeping score. But as the play progresses, you find little bits and pieces about who they actually are, and it turns out all three of the people are actually experienced a very traumatic thing that happened in their youth.
Yeah.
That affected the rest of their lives. So even though it's a bit of an avant-garde piece, it's realistically told. There is a very real story that's happening underneath it, and sort of then what ends up happening with the two men and them coming back together at the end of the play, where we're enemies and now they're pseudo friends again. There's a really interesting emotional arc, and it's in the 60. It's a 60 play. Like, it's just this tiny little thing. But it was such an amazing experience to be part of that group of people that was taking MacGyver's across Canada, and the reception that we got as we approached, we started in, actually we did a show initially in London, Ontario, but then we did the Fringe Festival in Toronto, and then by the time we got to Vancouver and Victoria, we were selling out all of our shows because people saw what it was that we were experiencing with this play. And then when we got back to Victoria, that's when we finally got a chance to meet Daniel MacIver, the playwright. He had originally to come and see it in Toronto and couldn't, but he happened to be out in Victoria, so he came and saw the play. And that was a really early experience, and it was a good way for me to kind of learn the ropes of that touring lifestyle very quickly early on in my career, but also just in a way that, because when you're on the road touring a show for 4 months, you see a lot of different venues and a lot of different audiences, and it really prepares you for what you might ultimately do in the future.
Talk about that a little bit, because not all of them were positive, right? Or
oh no, not all of them are positive at all. Yeah, I mean, well, it all depends too. Like it's dependent on the venue itself, and what level of support the venue is going to give you if you're a touring show kind of somebody else's space. But again, when you're doing a small show like that, like the venues might be theaters, they might be art galleries or high school gymnasiums.
Oh, wow.
All of these different things that, for a Fringe Festival circuit, all of these venues kind of pop up. There's only a few instances, like when we were in Winnipeg, for example. We were at the Menlo Theatre Centre, and that was fantastic because that's a 400-seat theater with lights and everything else. But at the same time, we didn't need that to do this show. Like, we literally could do this show on a beach or in a room, as long as there were some lights and people could see us. The story could still be told, and I think that was the thing that it really taught me was the simplicity of the story. Like, yes, bells and whistles are great. High production values. Of course, we want to go and see stuff like that, right? But you don't need it. If it's a good story, well told, it can literally be in your living room, and you're going to have the best theatrical experience of your life, or the best filmic experience of your life. So that was very definitely early on. That was one of the highlights, I think, for me, because it was such an interesting performance, because it wasn't realistic, and yet it had a realistic emotional through line. So playing those two things at the same time was really challenging, but also very interesting. And then just as learning the ropes of what it meant to be a world touring actor, I learned so much. But some of the venues were not great. Some of the audiences were not great. Early on, in particular, when we were still just finding our way, people were like, what do you do? Like, we don't really get this. But as they grew and as the word spread to the kind of people who would appreciate what we were doing, it really became quite magical.
So what happened after? So you slowly just talk progress.
Yeah, so I went from there to, again, just I did a variety of different Shakespeare festivals. I was very interested in Shakespeare. I was always really interested in literature as well, as I
Why
mentioned
Shakespeare?
earlier. Shakespeare, I think, because I idolized so many people who were Shakespearean actors. Early on, when I was starting to think about maybe something that I could do, I was really fascinated by Kenneth Branagh's adaptation of Henry V, which I think is one of the best adaptations of Shakespeare ever put to film. And Branagh was young. He was an upstart. He was like 25 when he made the film. He'd already won tons of awards for the stage version that he had also did as well as starred in. But when the film came out, it was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. And Emma Thompson, who later was married to Branagh, was in it, and she was awesome, as she always. And so I started to watch more filmed adaptations of Shakespeare, and I remember reading Hamlet in high school and that kind of thing.
Forced.
It was right, exactly. But that's the thing, is that when I got into it, I realized that the reason that it's boring when they teach an English class Shakespeare is because it's being taught by an English professor and not by a theater professor. Because when you really get down to the meat of what Shakespeare is, it's ribald, it's crude, it's funny, it's incredibly emotional, it deals with so many amazing intellectual ideas. I mean, Shakespeare's inventing words because he was writing in a particular type of verse, so things had to not necessarily rhyme, but they had to follow the structure of that verse. So sometimes the words that he had at his disposal just weren't adequate. So he created words that we use all the time in our,
What are some of the words? Just maybe a
Oh
couple.
gosh, murmur is a word that Shakespeare invented. Let's see, what else? Now you put me on the spot. There are a number of them, but let's see. Honestly,
One more.
I can't remember anymore
Forget
right
about
now.
it. But just progress.
Yeah, but the thing is that or at least the way that we say particular phrases too. Like, it might not be the words themselves that he invented, although he did. You can look it up. He invented quite a few.
I'm gonna go look.
But
I'm
you
so
should.
excited now.
The phrases that he used, and because he was a playwright and a director who was working at a time when London was incredibly overpopulated, there were threats of disease running through. So just the very act of going to the theater was a deal for people, but it was also a thing that both extremely wealthy people and extremely poor people could do. There were different places for them to sit, but they, in the Globe Theater and everything else. So there was that stuff that was going on, and for me, the problem, I think, with teaching Shakespeare English class, if you're not a particularly adept teacher, is that it's a little bit too much on the it's classical and it's good for you, so you should read it, and a little bit on the and it's also it's poetry, it's in verse. So when students read Shakespeare, they read it though it's a poem, and that is heartbeat of the Tsar. But when you get a really good actor speaking the language, you forget that it's verse, right? You see that it's somebody who is connecting with the material, connecting with the words, and it's rolled off their tongues. It's one of the reasons why I think Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet. I'm not sure familiar with it. Again, this is like a '90s movie. Leonardo DiCaprio, just pre-Titanic. Right. Claire Danes. It's a great movie. Stylistically, it is amazing, right? Like the way he's modernized it with the rapier guns instead of swords and everything else. The leads are beautiful and they're earnest young people, so you believe that they're in the circumstance that they're in. But the reason why I think it ultimately fails as a movie is because Luhrmann cast Pete Postlethwaite as the Friar Lawrence, kind of the confidant of Romeo, and when he kind of helps them get into the trouble that ultimately kills them both. And I say that it was a mistake to cast Postlethwaite because he is an amazing actor who really, really knows the source material. And he only comes into the film about halfway. So for the first half of that movie, you're watching it thinking, these guys are doing okay. It's Leonardo DiCaprio, it's Claire Danes. They're doing okay. I'm understanding everything. I'm believing the situations that they're in. And then he shows and starts talking, and it's like, oh my God, none of those people they were saying at all. Like that's the way I experienced it, right? Was like, oh, right. Those performances aren't actually that good. They are mimicking really well. Like they've been really well taught how to say the things that they were saying.
With no emotions, right?
But they don't believe what they're saying. Right? And then this guy comes in and just goes, all right, I'm going to show you how. And so for me, I was like, oh man, you've done your huge favor, Baz, by not casting him. Just cast somebody else. And it probably would have worked out better for you, in my opinion.
Okay. So what happened after your thing? How did you become like? What was the next step?
Well, again, it's kind of accidental for me because I'm one of the laziest people in the world. I like to say that. I have ADHD. We're all well.
Everybody here.
So for a long, what I considered or what people told me was lazy behavior, I have come to realize is that it's a bit of executive dysfunction. And
You go like then you die.
right, and I've got like a million things going on in my head at any one given time. It's hard for me to focus on things. So I learned early on that although I really loved acting, at the time when I sort of drifted away from it, I realized that I just didn't have what it took to be a working actor.
Yeah.
That's changed since. But at the time, it was like, because the job, that's the thing about actors, right? It's why they do deserve to be paid the money that they're paid.
Because
when
it's
they're
a lot
good.
of work.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Not just the emotional connection and the dealing with the lights and the camera and everything else, but that's the fun part of the job.
Yeah.
The not fun part of the job is getting the job. Auditing over and over and over and over again and facing rejection over and over and over again. At that time, I was just like, I don't think this is something that I want to do. Like I'll do things when people ask me to do it, and I'll create a few things of my own. But maybe I'm going to go back into writing. So I started to go back into writing a bit more, and I went to finish my English degree at the University of Victoria. And while I was there, and I was doing some acting because the pressure was off, so I could walk into an audition and nail it because I wasn't thinking like this is my bread and butter, right?
Yeah.
So I was doing some Shakespeare actually at the time, and I met a couple of guys who were working in Barkerville, and they're like, you got to come and do this for the summer because it's so much fun. I hire professional actors to come in and do the theater and do water wheel demonstrations and do all these sorts of things. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm doing Shakespeare in the. But then my situation at that time changed, and I was dating a girl who was not good for me, and I needed to get away, right? And so
She wasn't
eventually,
beating you up,
what's that?
She wasn't beating you up, was she?
No, not at all. Well, emotionally maybe, but she didn't mean to. It's not her fault. She's a great person, but it just wasn't. I just needed to get out of town.
Yeah.
And so I called a friend up and was like, hey, is there still a job opportunity up there? And he was like, yeah, actually, we need somebody. So, and then that actually spawned a whole new love affair with the craft of acting because, again, many things, a place like Barkerville gets overlooked. People think about a heritage site that employs actors, and they think, oh, it's just cheesy kind of things. Whereas that's what goes on in Barkerville at all. It's actually really quite first-rate performances that are happening, but the fact of the matter is that you're doing shows every day for the course of 111 days every summer. You end up doing a lot of the same material over and over and over and over and over again. But that's a good thing, right? Because it really taught me as an actor to appreciate that. Instead of getting tired of the material I was doing, using it as an opportunity to work my own craft and to be more connected with the people that I was working with, and to be able to do things. Because one of the great things about being in an immersive place, Barkerville, you're in that character for 7 hours a day. You're in that costume. You're in the actual place that the people playing lived and worked, doing things like operating a fully functional 15-foot Cornish water wheel mining engine, and in the ground, and like all of this sort of thing. It gets you further and further out of your head, which most actors really need, is to stop thinking and just do the thing. So for 8 years I did that with Barkerville.
8 years?
Yeah.
What was your character? What did you
I played a variety of characters. The historical character that I played that was the that I loved the most was Arthur Thomas Bushby, who was the court clerk to Matthew Bailey Begbie, who was the Justice of British Columbia. And Bushby has his own story, which is really quite fun, and it's a romance about him coming from England and then ultimately falling in love with somebody here. Did eventually marry her and then died very young. But he was one of the primary magistrates in the colony while it was being developed during the Gold Rush. So I got to play him. I really enjoyed that. He did a lot about it meant to be a man as much as a performer. But I did a couple of other different roles too. I did the water wheel and stuff for a while. But eventually what happened was that I left Barkerville to go and do a theater thing in Vancouver.
Yeah.
And then once that wrapped up, I decided that I was going to go back and do a master's degree in theater history, because I had some interesting theories about the birth of historical interpretation, the kind of theater we do in Barkerville, and its connection to Greek theater history and the formation of Western theater as we know it. Right?
Did they make you write a thesis?
Well, I quit before I did the thesis because I ran away to the Czech Republic.
What happened? What did you go to? What happened?
Well,
were people chasing you?
No.
Was that gear after you?
No. Actually, it was a kind of a miraculous thing, because when I went to Victoria, I had met my children in Barkerville, and we had decided collectively that we would go. This was long before the children were born. That we would go back to Victoria.
Yeah.
And I wound up going to UVic, and she was doing some acting as well. And but when I went back to do my master's degree, because I had been out of the academic game for a really long time. I was quite nervous because I wanted to. I had these ideas and I wanted to work into it. I needed some kind of sign that this should be that I should be doing. So when I had initially, before I went to the American Academy of Dramatic Arts in New York, I had auditioned for the Royal Academy of Dramatic Arts in London. Flew over to London, and when I was going on the plane over there, a friend of mine gave me a book to read while on the plane, and it was called The Shifting Point. It was written, what is his name? I can't remember. It doesn't matter. But in this book, The Shifting Point, there's an entire chapter dedicated to an American theater director named Charles Marowitz. Long story, so I'm not going to tell you the whole story. But I thought at the time, if I was ever lucky enough to work with some of that quality, then I would know that I had made it. Right? Like, it doesn't matter what happened to me after that point. I made it. And Peter Brook, by the way, wrote The Shifting Point. So almost 10 years to the day, I'm talking to my grad supervisor about coming into the theater history program. I'm a little bit nervous. I don't really know if this is the right thing for me. And she's like, oh, by the way, because she got me into a directing course because I wanted to do some stuff. So I got to audit a directing course, even though I was in theater history. She's like, by the way, look up Charles Marowitz if you've never ever heard of him, because he's coming to teach this directing at UVic. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, I know exactly who that is, and you're telling me I'm going to have an opportunity to learn theater from this guy who has run he ran Space Theater in London for 25 years. He's worked with so many people all over the place. Yes, I'm coming. This is it. I'm going to come. And so I went, and it was an interesting scenario because the theater course he had come up just on spec, and it turned out it was because he was getting afraid of kind of what was happening, and he lived in the U.S., right? Pamela was his next door neighbor, and like a bunch of other people. But he was getting nervous about what was happening with the Republican regime that was starting to form, and he was looking to get he and his wife and their young son potentially out of the States, and he'd been told Victoria was a really great place to go. So he literally phoned up the theater department and was like, "Hey, I'd like to come there for a few months and just see if it's a place that do you have some money to have me teach?" And so they were enough to say yes, but they gave him the the directing class that they gave him to teach was a third-year directing class. So he thought it was actually a like a math class, right?
Yeah.
But that was the first year of directing. Like, it was a theater program, and most of the people who were in that in that particular class weren't looking to be theater directors, but to be high school teachers.
Yeah.
So we had this group of 18 people who really didn't know who he was or care,
Yeah.
and me and this other guy who totally knew who he was and really cared. And so we hit it off, and he got me to audition for a production of Hamlet that he was doing, and he cast me in it. And I just had such an amazing experience, an actor working with that kind of a director. I'd never had that kind of experience before. And I was already ready by that semester doubting my decision to go into theater history, because I was realizing that what that meant is going to now be a theater historian and not a theater practitioner as much. So I just married him and said, I know what your next project is, because I knew he was being hired to go and direct Václav Havel, the first democratically elected president of the Czech Republic, retired in 2003. And the Czech Republic entered the European Economic Union in 2004. And so to celebrate that, the National Theatre did one of Havel's plays, because Havel had been a playwright. He was anti-communist playwright through the 70s. And that's why he was basically put forth as the first presidential candidate when they were having a free election. But because they'd never done one of his plays since he was elected, he was president for 15 years, they didn't want it to reek, propaganda. They didn't do any of his plays. But when he retired, they're like, well, great, to celebrate us entering the EU now, we're gonna do a play, Temptation. Bokošení is what it is in Czech. We want you to, even though he didn't speak Czech, he's a highly respected director. They brought translators in to help with it. So anyway, I knew about this. For reasons, again, it's too long a story, but it had to do with the fact that my master's degree, I was studying Sophocles. Sophocles was the first person in Western history to be elected to public office based on the fact that he was a playwright. He was an anti-government playwright back in 500 BCE. Václav Havel was the second person in Western history. So like, wait a minute. I can either be here reading about history, I can be going over there and helping make it right. To meet Havel, it was an amazing experience. So I walked into his office, to Charles Marwitz's office, and said, I know this is what you're going to do. Take me with you. I won't ask for any money. I'll just make coffee. I'll just sit in the audience. And to my absolute pleasure and shock, he said, yeah, I think I can make that work out. So I went over to Czech Republic for 3 months with him, and it was amazing, because I was living in a youth hostel because I didn't have any money, right? But the theater that were actually producing this play in, it's called the Národní divadlo, which is the States Theater. It's part of a 3-theater national complex in Prague. It was the same opera house that Mozart premiered Don Giovanni in 1787, and he conducted the orchestra stage. So the stage we were working on, Mozart had stood on, 300 years earlier. It was just an incredible experience to be there and working and meeting those actors, and ultimately learning how to communicate with people. They eventually made me the director of the show, which I thought was really nice of them. But working in an entirely different language, and that was a really cool thing to learn as both an actor and a director, that you don't even need to speak the same language people that you're working with, as long as you can connect emotionally to material and actually be able to convey it is saying. I mean, we had an English translation that we did, but by the end, we could just read the Czech.
What were some of the connections that you made in terms of, because it's a different language, right? So, like, on that level.
It was amazing, because not only were, like I didn't speak the language, but thankfully most of them spoke English, because unlike in North America, where we only ever speak English, no other language, unless, Canada, and we have French and English. But like in Europe, everybody speaks multiple languages, because they're exposed to all of these different languages all of the time, right? So But we also had this translator named Marta, who was a lovely woman, and she was funny and spoke English really well. She'd lived in the States for a while, so she was really my go-to to a lot of the people initially, so that was really nice to be able to form a kind of connection, and to have somebody who it made it easier to talk to other people because they knew and trusted her. So they were a bit more open with me. But then there was also like the whole, there were people on that were like from Finland, from all sorts of places. One of my best buds when I was over there was the Finnish dude who had been going to university and found out about this thing that was happening. So he volunteered to help out, and so we would go out all the time and introduce me to other international students from that university that we went to, and then suddenly we're going out for dinner. Group of people, all of 7 of us are from totally different places all around the world, and yet we're able to be there sharing this experience in a way that, it was just absolutely cool.
It goes back to the saying that all truths are universal, right? It's their universal language that brings everybody together. So then what happened? How did you like? What were some of those?
Well, so when I got back from that, I spent some time in Vancouver and was just doing a little bit of piecemeal shows. I was an auditioning actor. I was, I did a couple of commercials, what a late chat line thing and that kind of stuff. But then we found our way up to Barkerville, and then so then I had, I was married and had children, and that was the thing, is we figured out, if we ever had kids, we would want to raise them in an environment, not down on the coast in Vancouver where we were. So it all just sort of happened again very nicely. But I moved in from doing full-time acting in a place like Barkerville to being part of the administrative team. So because I was doing some promotional stuff by then as well. I started a small media company, had promotional DVDs for bands and theater companies and that kind of stuff. So Barkerville was very interested in having me come in and help them with their marketing. And then ultimately they promoted me into management, where I sort of looked after all of the actors in Barkerville, contract them and help them develop programming and scripts and whatnot. But then through a series of, again, just really great friends that I met through that here in Prince George, I met a bunch of people who were interested in making films, and because we had Barkerville as a potential location, as well as Wells, and then stuff that was going on here, we just started to write and produce a whole series of films. So we did like 7 or 8 different short films up here and in Barkerville. I really, and I by then too, sort of during that period of time, I had connected with some guys who were looking at a documentary about Gold Rush, so I produced and did some writing for that documentary as well, which ultimately was on CBC. But the films, we were just writing, short little, 10 to 20 minute gross horror movies that would go to different After Dark festivals and whatnot. But through the course of that, I had met a number of really talented people. I knew a bunch of actors from my days back in Vancouver. There was this one film project that I had always kind of wanted to work, which was a fantasy project of mine, which was a Stephen King short story called The Doctor's Case, which is about it's a Sherlock Holmes story that he wrote back in the 80s. But I'd been reading that story since I was a teenager, and absolutely just connected with it. I'm a huge Sherlock Holmes fan anyway, so the fact that Stephen King had written a Sherlock Holmes story was interesting to me, and because I was working in Barkerville all the time, all of the interiors of those buildings are Victorian drawing rooms, and just looked like it would be the perfect place to film something like that. But I didn't ever think of even trying to go after the right bit, because I'm not an accomplished filmmaker in any stretch. But then I found out about this program that Stephen King had called the Dollar Baby Deal, which is where he would allow emerging filmmakers to license short stories from him, provided he had given the license to anyone else already, and it would be a non-commercial contract. So you have the right to raise money to make the movie. You can make it. You can show it at film festivals. You just can't sell it to anybody.
Oh, you cannot put on. Can you put it on TV?
No. It was very strict about no TV, no internet. Actually, at that time, things happened slightly different since, and I've been part of that. But anyway, long story the Doctor's Case was part of that list.
Yeah.
So I put in a pitch what I wanted to do with it. They granted me the opportunity. I had 1 year to make them, and we ultimately moved it from primarily being shot in Barkerville to being shot in Victoria because we got access to Craigdarroch Castle, which is a perfect opportunity for us to film in there. And so the Doctor's Case, I got to work with some established actors that I had admired before, like William B. Davis and Denise Crosby. And that was a really big deal to be able to mix them in with a stable of people that I knew and worked with all of the time. And the film really took off. We wound up in 40 different international festivals. We won a couple of dozen awards, and it was really the thing that allowed me to say to people, "You're not just playing at this. This is the thing that we did. Give me some money to make something else." And so we were able to take that and kind of spin it into our film company, Barker Street Cinema, which now has a dozen different productions under our belts, and we're constantly working on new things right now too.
So what are some of your projects you're working on right now? No.
Well, there's the things. There's a documentary that Barker Street is producing about Michael Hogan, who was one of the stars of Battlestar Galactica, who recently has had some physical injuries that he's been rallying back from. So we're just in the process of putting together a documentary with his family's permission. There's a great little short called Conquest that we filmed here at FanCon a couple of years ago, Northern FanCon, which is the big entertainment expo here, using some of the celebrities from that. It's doing really well on the festival circuit right now. It's only a 10-minute film, but it's meant as a proof of concept for a much larger piece. And my big partner Norm Coyne also wrote that script and executive produced along with me. He just got a grant through a media body that will allow him to develop it further into a new script. I'm working on right now the production of, and have been for a couple of years now, a massive documentary called Search Out the Land, a two-part. It'll be a 4-hour documentary about the settlement here, in the original Irish settlements here in Canada, and sort of leading up through the history of Jews in Canada as well. And then I'm doing some editing on that, as well as I've done some writing already, and I'm producing it. I've got a vampire movie that I didn't write. A very friend of mine, Christy SDS, for a fellow in here who wants to produce it. It's interesting because it's very, very campy in its idea. Like how it was pitched to me was vampire strippers on skidoos, but that's not what it really was. It's actually quite a gripping crime movie that ultimately turns into vampire film. So we're just in the really, really early stages. We've just gone through script development, and we will ultimately producing it here probably next year. And then I'm also writing something I haven't been doing recently. I've just very early stages writing.
What is it?
Well, I don't even know what it is, but it does involve a makeup artist, actually.
Oh, wow.
And so I have a little bit of help there. But it's this. I don't even know if this is the story, but one of the elements is that there is a woman who does makeup for cadavers in a funeral home, who hired on to do makeup in an independent film production that's happening in her town. That's just the part that I've been working with, and then there's like several other completely random, disparate scenes that we've been writing that don't seem like fit into that story at all. But we're gonna figure out if we can make it work. See, I don't like talking. I don't like talking about it because it just makes it sound trite. It's really cool. Trust me. We're done. This is gonna be really cool.
Cannot wait to see it. So I have to finish. But let's just no. I can go on here because so much interesting subject, right? Because anyway, so let's talk about your acting school and how people can sign up and come into it and all that stuff.
Oh, sure, yeah. So Story Institute was initially the brainchild of an actor in Vancouver named Michael Coleman, who has been on every single CW show ever, done a lot of animated cartoon voices and stuff right from the until now. He's a great. He was also in The Doctor's Case, the Stephen King movie that I did. And I've always really you know, I've been a teacher at various stages of my career, and it seemed like it was something that Prince George could use. You know, I had the opportunity to work on several features here. I know that there's a very large group of passionate people, all aspects of filmmaking, and that's kind of one of the things that we wanted to bring together. But I also knew that if we're going to attract productions to come, use the area, especially with the actors, it'd be a really great idea if there was training opportunities for actors, and specifically for film. You know, there's opportunities that people have here through Theatre Northwest and through G.D. Russell to do live stage performances and musicals and things, but there hasn't ever really anything that focused on the subtlety of film acting. So we brought the school here in September of 2022, graduated 15 students out of our semester, and 12. We're just into our halfway through our second year now. You know, it's our sophomore year, and we've learned a lot, and we're really excited. We're really excited about some potential opportunities to partner with Studio 2880 as well, to sort of bring all of our creative minds together and see what we're doing. But so yeah, that's what we do. We do a full-time program. It's 20 hours a week. It's an accredited school. So you know, student loans are available to our students, transfer credits, that kind of thing.
That's amazing, because lots of schools, they don't do that, eh?
I know, because it takes a lot to get to that point. It's an administrative headache, to be perfectly to do it. But we were fortunate enough that Michael had the experience to be able to do that, and it has meant the world to all of our students, right? Especially now, it's the best time in the world to be a student if you're borrowing money from the government, because they put a moratorium on interest. So money that you borrow is the money you pay back, and you can take a time to pay it back. So, but yeah, so that's what we do here. It's called Story Institute. Storyinstitute.ca is the best way to find out all of the information. But yeah, we're just starting our second diploma program of the year next week. And it's the sort of production heavy. We have the professional actor, which is us basically taking people with little to no experience and teaching them not only how to act, but how to live as an actor and work as an actor. And then the second half, all the working actors, where we actually do produce our own material. So we sit down, we get everyone together, we write, we teach everyone a little bit about sound, a little about lights, a little about camera work, so everyone an opportunity to move through all of the different aspects of what it takes to put a film together. So it's very hands-on, right? It is very hands-on.
That's very important. Anything else you want to talk about?
I don't know. I feel like I've been talking forever. I would like to find out more you soon. But
you went 2 hours? 2 hours? Or almost 2 hours to talk. It never happened before. Okay, so I'm going to finish it off so we can.
Okay, absolutely, yeah.
Thank you very much for joining us on this episode. I hope that you learned something new here. I wish you the best, and see you on our next episode. It was a pleasure to have you on the show, sir.
Oh, my pleasure too.
Hopefully see you again and do some amazing projects together.
I hope so.